Good morning and good afternoon to everyone, wherever you are joining us from. Welcome to this session for you today, Defending Your Research with a Calm Approach, which is held within the ConReceipt Virtual Week. My name is Daniel Blake. I'm the Senior Marketing Manager for Key Global Accounts at Elsevier, and I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the National Consortium of Scientific and Technological Information for inviting us to partner with them at this important scientific event here for the scientific community in Mexico. Elsevier, as a leader in information and analytics for customers across the global research and health ecosystems, welcomes you to this one-hour session. Important to mention that we'll have some minutes at the end of the session for questions and answers, and feel free to send your questions in the chat at any time during the presentation and we'll address them at the end. So without further ado, it's an honor for me to present Catherine Carnovale. She's a publisher for artificial intelligence, security and health technology here in Elsevier. And before we have her presentation, I'm going to read her bio to you so you can have a bit more knowledge about who's presenting. So, as a publisher for computer science, Catherine works on a group of journals covering themes of digital security, artificial intelligence, and health technology. Based in Amsterdam, she works on an international journals portfolio to build relationships with editors from around the globe. Prior to joining the publishing team at Elsevier, Catherine worked as a postdoctoral researcher in the area of nanobiotechnology and regularly engages with early career researchers to bridge the gap between young authors and the publication process. In her spare time, she reads a lot of scientific journals and enjoys cooking in her tiny apartment in Amsterdam. So please, without further ado, I'd like to welcome Catherine and give her the floor. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Daniel. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining me today. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks to Daniel for the introduction and the consortium for the invitation to join. So as Daniel said, my name's Kat Carnovale, and today I'll be presenting you some information to help you respond to reviewers' comments the calm way. I'll save some time for questions at the end of the presentation, so please feel free to write them into the chat box and we'll do our best to get through them all. So just to follow on from Daniel's introduction, I want to start off a little bit about my background before we dive into today's topic, which is all about the peer review process. Like a number of the presenters at the conference, I work with Elsevier and I'm a publisher looking after our journals in AI, digital security and health technology. You may wonder what it is that a publisher does and how I came to be here. So I grew up in Australia where I did my PhD in applied physics at the Royal Melbourne Institute of Technology. And after I finished, I decided that I wanted to see more of the world. And one of the wonderful things about a postdoc is that they really allow you to live and work almost anywhere. So I accepted a position at the Italian Institute of Technology in Geneva, where I did a postdoc in nanotechnology, before deciding that the part of research that I really enjoyed the most was actually outside of the lab. And I wanted to engage with researchers and be involved in an academic environment. So I moved again, this time to Amsterdam, to be a publisher for Elsevier. And in this role, I work every day with editors, with authors, and with reviewers, helping them with all aspects of their roles. Every day is different, and yet every day I draw on my experience as a researcher to help guide my decisions. And it's only through my own experience that I understand what it's like to dedicate years to experiments, months to writing up your results, and weeks to waiting for decisions. But I know, thinking back, that it was a bit of a mystery to me what actually happened after I clicked submit. So I'd like to show you a little bit about what happens after you click that submit button and the process of peer review begins. So the whole process of peer review starts as soon as you submit your manuscript to a journal. After submission, your manuscript is assigned to an editor. The editor will first do a technical screening, And that's to ensure that the manuscript is complete, that all of the files are there, that there is a conflict of interest statement, and that everything can be opened and that it's ready for assessment. If this is all fine, the manuscript is then assessed by the editor. This initial assessment is to determine if it meets basic quality standards and if it falls within the aims and scopes of the journal. This decision is called a desk decision, and I'll speak more about this in a moment. Manuscripts which pass the desk decision are then sent out for external peer review. If you make it to this stage, a minimum of 2 peer reviewers will assess your manuscript. The reviewers will produce detailed reports which communicate their decisions back to the editor. And then the editor looks at these reports and uses the reviewer recommendations to make a final decision. The editor then communicates this decision back to you. It's important to keep a couple of things in mind about this process. You should think about revisions as a very normal part of the process and expect that you will have to make some changes to your manuscript based on the comments of the reviewers. A manuscript could go through multiple rounds of revision depending on the recommendations of the reviewers and the editor's own assessment. So that means that you might be asked to revise your manuscript more than once, and that is totally okay. You might be thinking that this process is really quite long and wonder why you would bother to go through with it. And that's a good question. So why do we do peer review? Peer review is really the backbone of scientific peer-reviewed literature. So peer review has been a formal part of scientific communication since the first scientific journals appeared more than 300 years ago. The objective of peer review is to uphold the quality and validity of individual articles and journals to ensure that material published is of the highest quality and reliability. We do this by selecting reviewers who are experts, who are unbiased in that they have no conflict of interest with the authors or the subject of the manuscript, and their role is to judge the manuscript based on its merits in a fair and impartial way. The comments that you receive in peer review should provide you with constructive criticism. The idea being that you take these comments and you use them to improve the quality of your research before it goes to publication. Reviewers and editors spend a lot of time on these comments, with the end goal being to ensure that your paper is improved and that it's even more robust before it's published. Once you receive comments, your job is to consider and respond to each of these comments. This is one of your responsibilities as an author as part of this process. And I'll give you some tips about how to do this later on. So back to desk decisions. These are the decisions that are made immediately after the manuscript is submitted, before it's sent out for peer review. There are a number of different decisions that you can expect at this stage. You could be rejected because your manuscript is out of scope. You may also be rejected on other grounds, and the rejection letter will usually state the reasons for this rejection. In general, these papers are usually rejected for external review for one of 3 reasons. Either the paper has significant problems with its language or structure, because it's ethically unsound, or because it doesn't follow the guidelines provided in the journal's guide for authors. Some editors really do receive a huge number of submissions, and these issues are really the obvious ones that will stop the paper before it gets to peer review. Other decisions that you can expect at this stage is a suggestion to transfer it. So if the paper is technically sound, but it's out of scope, editors might suggest another journal for you to transfer the paper to. But this will always remain your choice, and your manuscript will never be transferred without your consent. And finally, if your manuscript passes all of these initial checks, it will be sent out for review. Now, there's actually more than one way that peer review can occur. So different journals follow different peer review processes depending on how the journal is managed, and it also depends on the type of content that the journal publishes. The most common forms of peer review are single blind review, and this is when the identity of the reviewers is not revealed to the authors, but the identity of the authors is known to the reviewers. Also very common is double-blind review, and this is when the identity of both the reviewers and the authors is not disclosed to each other. So these journals will require the author to submit a manuscript which is de-identified. Less commonly, journals may use triple-blind review, which requires the identity of the editor, the reviewer, and the author to be hidden from each other. This is quite a rare arrangement, and in this case, it also requires a handling editor, so that's somebody who will not be making a final decision to ensure that the manuscript moves between the right authors and the right reviewers. Then we have open peer review, and this is when the identity of reviewers and authors are shared openly along with the reviewer's report, which may be published along with the article. Open review can also refer to peer review, which is open to participation from readers as well. So submitted papers are put online for readers to review publicly. Before you submit, you can actually see which style of peer review the journal that you're submitting to follows by checking the guide for authors, which is available on the journal homepage. Regardless of the method that's chosen, the reviewers will assess your manuscript and make a decision based on the merit of the paper. Even the best papers will receive comments which ask the authors to address certain points within the manuscript. This is not something that you should be afraid about or embarrassed about. It's really a very normal part of the process. Once the reports are sent back to the editor, he'll use them to make a final decision on the paper and send this decision to you, the author. So there are a number of different decisions that can be made on your manuscript after the first round of review. You may receive a rejection. If this is the case, you should also receive some constructive feedback for ways that you could improve your paper before you consider submitting it to another journal. Take this feedback on board and try and adopt it to improve your manuscript. You may receive the offer to transfer your manuscript, and this clearly means that the editor and the reviewers think that the material deserves to be published, but it may be better suited to another journal. You may also receive a revision decision, and there are two main ones, which are major revision and minor revision. Revised decisions mean that the reviewers and the editors both think that there is potential for your paper to be published in the journal, but there are some shortfalls that they have identified. So minor revisions are usually requested because the reviewers have small issues with the data that needs to be addressed. For a minor revision, these usually won't require extensive further experiments. The manuscript may need additional references added. It may need a small amount of copy editing, or maybe further attention paid to formatting. You should always look at the guide for authors for how to proceed in that respect. Major revisions are usually requested because the reviewers identify flaws or major mismatches in the data or the analysis, or they may believe that the conclusions presented in the paper are not really supported by the data. A major revision may require you to head back into the lab or to do more work, and these experiments will be more involved than what's requested for a minor revision. Other reasons for major revisions might be that the writing or presentation needs significant improvement. There may be missing or unclear sections in the paper. The hypothesis, the objectives, or the research methods aren't clearly stated. It may be well written and interesting, but needs to be reframed or expanded to properly fit the scope of the journal. Or the editors might believe that you may need to do a more extensive literature review to adequately reference your paper. These are just some of the common suggestions to authors, but there are definitely other comments that could be made at this point. This should give you a good idea of the differences, though, between major and minor revisions. So once you have addressed these comments, and we'll go into that in more detail later, there are a number of different decisions which can be made on your manuscript after review. You may receive another revision decision, in which case you'll be asked to make further changes to your manuscript. The manuscript may be accepted, it may be rejected, or it might be recommended to transfer to another journal. So Let's imagine that you've submitted a manuscript and it passes through the decision stage and it's sent out for review. Then you wait weeks to get the answer and the decision letter comes back with a revised decision. So what do? There are a lot of different emotions that you might feel when you receive that revised decision. You might be disappointed, you might be upset, you might be shocked. But it's really important to remember that this is really a normal part of the process. It's a funny thing because supervisors give us a lot of direction and guidance about how to structure our experiments and how to write papers, but the process of submission and revision is often not spoken about. Receiving criticism and defending your research takes practice, and our experience shows that it's best done with a calm approach. So, when the decision letter arrives, read over the comments. Take some time to understand the reviewer's feedback and consider what they're asking you to do. You'll be given some time for the revision, a time frame, and it will be longer for a major revision if they're expecting a lot of extra work, and shorter if it's only a minor revision with minor comments to address. The main point here to stress is that you shouldn't succumb to the pressure to reply immediately, especially if you're a little bit emotional about the whole process of replying to the reviewer's comments. While you should be really mindful about the time frame and make sure that you do return your revision within that time frame, allow yourself a little bit of time to process the comments, comprehend them, and keep your cool. Read over them and take some time to think about them. We like to recommend that you look at them again the next day. The reason that we say this is because by letting some time pass, you give yourself the opportunity to let your emotions subside, which is really important for preventing an impulsive or heated response. You'll definitely regret it later. One of the functions of peer review is to encourage you, the author, to deliver stronger, more robust research. Think of this process as an opportunity to improve your manuscript, which will increase the likelihood that it will be useful for other researchers. So, after allowing yourself a day to process the comments, switch gears into answer mode. This is the time to trust your natural analytical processing skills. These are all the skills that you use to write the paper in the first place. Keep in mind that the editor of the journal will receive the comments and that they may also forward them onto the reviewer, who will also see them. Your responses should be polite and objective, and they should balance the line between being concise, but also making sure that you address every point that's raised. There's no space for ego in your response. Remember that the reviewer's comments are not personal. It's always nice to start off your response by thanking the reviewers for identifying the weaknesses in your paper and providing you with the opportunity to strengthen your research prior to publication. Try to compose your counter-argument with a polite response, which is backed up by evidence to support your position. The art of well-mannered rebuttal can be difficult to grasp at the start, and there's nothing wrong with disagreeing with some of the comments that the reviewers make. Here are some sentences which provide you with a polite way to offer a counter-argument to the reviewer's comments. Things like, we agree with the reviewer that, but. It's true that, but. We support the reviewer's assertion that, although we feel that. So these are some ways that you can try to agree with the reviewers, but also politely get your point across. One of the best ways to ensure that you cover all of the reviewers' comments is to create a list. Reviewers and editors shouldn't have to reread the whole manuscript again, searching for the parts that you've changed. So one suggestion is that you organize your responses by listing each of the reviewers' comments and then addressing each one separately underneath it. You should really try to avoid sort of lazy responses, things like, I've answered that, or fixed in the text. Be really clear about how you responded and state where it fits into the manuscript. And you can do this by copying and pasting the response or the new text below the reviewer's comment and include the page and line number for where this can be found in the text. This practice allows the editor to see really easily that you've taken all the comments on board, that you've answered each one, and that you've also incorporated into the new manuscript. One of the most important things is that you really must address every comment. This doesn't mean that you need to agree with each one, but you can't ignore anything because you disagree or you don't feel like answering it. This is something that editors and reviewers get really annoyed about, and it can result in your manuscript being rejected or you being asked to revise again because you failed to address all the concerns that were raised. The most time-efficient and respectful way forward in this is to address all the comments, including the ones that you disagree with. And if you disagree, clearly state why you haven't taken those particular comments on board. Remember to make sure that all your comments are backed up with evidence to support your position. And then the last tip I have is to be mindful. Editors are really busy people, so be mindful and try to make it as easy as possible for the editors and the reviewers to assess your revision. Being organised when you resubmit your manuscript allows the revision process to run smoothly and efficiently. This also benefits you because it means that the process runs much more quickly, which means you get a decision faster. While some journals might have individual instructions, in general, we recommend that your resubmission should contain 4 things. The first is a cover letter. So a brief and polite cover letter that you address to the editor should accompany the resubmission. This is usually written by the corresponding author, and it should include the manuscript details like the title, the manuscript number, and the author list. And it's always a nice touch to thank the editor for the opportunity to improve and resubmit the manuscript. The cover letter is a formality and it should be kept very brief. The next thing to include is a list of responses. So remember that list that we made with each of the reviewer's comments and your response to each one? This list really gives the editor the impression that you're an organised, methodical researcher, and it also makes it really easy for the editor to reassess the manuscript. The third item is a track change document. So you should return your revised manuscript with your revisions highlighted. You can use a tool like Microsoft Word's track changes or something similar to illustrate how and where your revised manuscript has been changed. This is the easiest way to show the editor that you have indeed made all the changes that you said you did. It shouldn't be up to the editor to cross-check the original and the revised manuscript to see if there are changes made. Make it easy by tracking the changes. And the last item is a clean version. So submit a clean version of your manuscript to show your work in its final form. The file is usually uploaded as the manuscript file, and it allows the editor to read your work without the distraction of all the marked up details. And this ensures that it will be ready for production. So before I wrap up, here are some quick tips that I'd like to share. Don't rush into commenting. Take your time and make sure that you address everything. And also make sure that you keep within the timeline that you're provided. This varies from journal to journal, and some journals even have different timeframes for different decisions. Generally, it sits around the 21-day mark for a lot of journals. If you can't deliver the revised manuscript in this timeframe, make sure that you communicate with the editor. Just briefly outline the reasons why you can't fit your the work into the timeframe, and set a new deadline or provide a new deadline that you know that you can make. When your manuscript is ready for submission, there are a few things that you should ask yourself before you submit to the journal. You should ask, is my paper technically and ethically sound? This question really covers a lot of points. It covers the research itself. So is the data presented really a correct reflection of the experiments and the observations? Have you used all the correct statistical methods? Have you analysed your data correctly? Have you used adequate controls? Have you obtained ethical approval? All of this, if it's relevant for your work, should be considered before you submit. You shouldn't wait for the reviewers to point it out to you. It also covers the originality of the work. So having the correct authorship listing, making sure that you've properly acknowledged all of the work of others, and that you've also disclosed a conflict of interest, even if you have no conflict to declare. The website listed on the bottom of the slide lays out all the responsibilities for authors, and it covers this point in a lot of detail. So I encourage you to check it out. The second thing to ask is, does my manuscript fit the scope of the journal? We see so many papers that are rejected just because they're out of scope. You might really, really want to submit to a particular journal because of its reputation or its impact factor, but the manuscript must fit within the aims and scopes for them to consider it. Then the third thing is, does my manuscript meet the journal standards in terms of impact? So there are a really wide range of journals out there. Journals which take the most cutting edge, high impact research through to journals which take incremental research and negative findings. There is a home for every paper out there. You should be ambitious in your choice of journal, and you should also be really familiar with the type of content that they publish so that you know that your manuscript so that you can find the right place for your manuscript. So, after listening to the presentation, if you still want more information, here are my top tips. So choosing the right journal, like I said, will help you to not be desk rejected because it's out of scope. Our Journal Finder service allows you to enter the title and the abstract of your paper to easily find journals that it's best suited to. Journal Finder uses semantic search technology to match your paper to scientific journals, and it will give you a list of up to 50 journals that are ranked by relevance to the paper that you've submitted. If you need help with language, with translation, or with illustrations for your manuscript before you submit, you can visit the web shop for all of these services. And lastly, you can visit our author resource page for a whole stack of resources which will help you with your research, the writing, publication, promotion, tracking, all of these phases of the journey. There are links to Researcher Academy, where you can undertake free courses. There's tips for promoting your research on social media, and lots of advice for how to track the impact of your paper using different metrics. So this brings me to the end of my presentation, and I welcome any questions from the audience that you might have.
Thank you, Catherine. Really, really interesting. I mean, I think for people who are looking into this, some really good tips, some really good experience, and I think it will be very useful for them indeed. So first of all, thank you. Thank you for this really insightful presentation. I'd just like to say we're getting comments from all over Mexico: Puebla, Hidalgo, Oaxaca, Aguascalientes, San Luis Potosí, Guerrero. Too many to mention, but there's a lot of people coming in. There's a lot of people saying hello and just kind of giving a wave. And so if we're ready, without further ado, why don't we go ahead with the questions? They're coming up on the banners, but the banners are now coming up with comments. I know Claudia's doing the questions. Here you go. Here's the first question. So let's kick off with this. What do you recommend to consult? No, what do you recommend to consult to select the best journal to submit the article?
Right. That's a great question. So I would really recommend that you jump onto our Journal Finder. So when you go to that website, you paste in your manuscript title and your abstract. So just these two things, and then you get a list of ranked journals. And that it's not just the titles, you get to see things like editorial speed, you get to see metrics, impact factor, site score, and you obviously get to see the aims and scopes of the journal. So you can judge for yourself whether, you know, this judgment is accurate for you. You obviously can then go through and read the top ranked journals to see which one you might want to choose for your article, and you can be as ambitious as you like, making sure that you fit within the aims and scopes of the journal. So that's a really good way to get a nice selection that narrows it down for you to choose from.
Perfect. Yeah, it seems very clear. We're just having a few others come in, but they're mixing up with the comments. Sorry, I was just typing away because some of the questions are in Spanish, so we're just going to decide. I think I'll take them in Spanish and I'll translate them for you. That's not a problem at all.
Thanks, Dan.
If we can, happy. If we could take the next question. Okay, here we go. Is it appropriate to ask for more time when you have fallen short? And this is from Nelly.
Hi, Nelly. That's a good question. Absolutely. It is appreciated if you can ask for more time rather than just letting the deadline pass. This shows that you're organized, that you anticipate that maybe you won't be able to make that deadline. Just write an email to the editor saying that you're sorry, that, you know, for whatever reason it is, you don't have to give any details on that you're not able to make the deadline, and that you should provide an indication. So ask for an extension of 2 weeks, something that you know that you can make, and ask the editor if he will approve that deadline. In my experience, if you give a reasonable time frame, they will be happy to accept that.
Great. That's very clear again. And we have another one coming in. As you can see, these are coming in from different platforms, which is, it's really cool. So the last one was from someone watching on YouTube, Nelly, and Irene, who's on Facebook. She's asking, good morning. I'd like to know what strategies you have to promote publications.
Right. Okay. So this is a really good question, Irene. And for this, I would recommend that you jump onto Researcher Academy. Researcher Academy is a completely free platform that we have, and there are all sorts of modules that you can have a look at. There's a lot of resources, and one of the modules is how to promote your own research. And if you jump on there, it will give you all the best tips to promote your research, where you should set up, or some ideas of where you could set up profiles online to give you really good publicity and really good exposure, and some tips from people who have done this really well to get exposure for their publication. So we really encourage you to check out Researcher Academy.
Yeah, again, and just to highlight again, that's free and that's full of resources. That's a very good resource to point out. We're happy to send the URL after this session to the participants. Okay, moving on. We have a question from Sandra. She's watching us on YouTube. And what if you detect a non-constructive comment in the reviews? Is it a correct way to proceed?
This is a really interesting point to raise. And I mean, I'll sort of expand this out. Non-constructive, something that you feel may be biased, or something that you maybe feel is offensive. All of these types of things I think I'll include in this comment. So we're really trying to do a lot of work in this area to make sure that our editorial teams are really balanced, that they're really diverse, and that they're really aware of any biases, whether they be conscious or unconscious, that they may have. Having said that, if you receive comments that you don't feel are constructive or that you think are offensive, the first point of action is to contact the editor-in-chief. From this point, we follow COPE guidelines. So COPE is the Committee on Publication Ethics, and they have a very detailed set of guidelines for dealing with these sorts of issues. And they do come up in academic publishing, unfortunately. So authors are entitled to be treated courteously, and you're entitled to have a fair and unbiased review. And we follow up on all of these comments. So if you contact the editor-in-chief, they will take this forward. Generally, they contact the publisher, so this is something that we would generally handle, and we'll contact that reviewer to get clarity. I mean, everybody's entitled, obviously, to the right of reply, and we look into all of these matters.
Okay, please, for those of you who are asking questions, if the answers aren't clear, so far they've been very clear, but if you have any follow-up questions, feel free to also take them up in the chat. Anyway, moving on, what do you recommend to consult? No, we've had this one. This was the very first question. So, okay, maybe let's skip to another one. Okay. It is very difficult to keep emotion out of a process where you have been rejected. We all know this. How would you recommend to do so, yet still provide your key thoughts and defend your manuscripts?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I know from my own research that you get it back, and really what you want to get is an accept straight away. I mean, let's not lie. When we submit a paper, we want it to be accepted, and there's nothing wrong with wanting that. The reality is that you don't get accepted. An accept is not a desk decision. The best case scenario is being asked to revise and submit a revision, because this is how you get accepted. So as I said, the first thing is really to read all the comments, and then I recommend that you shut all of the comments. Just take your time. So you never will have to reply the next day. That's unreasonable. Read them and allow yourself whatever emotional response that you have. That's fine, and it's very human. Come back the next day. If it's very emotionally charged, come back the day after that. That's fine as well. And then once you sort of let the emotions subside, then start working through each one at a time. Don't be overwhelmed. Sometimes I've received review reports back, and obviously there's more than one reviewer. Sometimes there's 3. There's going to be at least 2. And when you see this sea of comments, it's overwhelming, and I know how that feels. But I suppose my key advice would be to read all of the comments, close it, walk away, come back at a time when you're feeling much more calm, and then just go through them one by one.
Yeah, and just to follow up on that, I mean, as we all know, I mean, this is a very difficult process because, you know, these filters are in place for a reason. Do you know exactly what the rate of approval is for a first-time submission as a percentage?
It really depends. It really depends on the journal. I mean, if you're looking at a journal like The Lancet, I mean, the rejection rate is incredibly high, you know, and you can actually see all of this on the journal finder. So you can see the rate of acceptance and rejection in the journal finder. So that might give you an indication as to how difficult it is to get your manuscript into a particular journal. I mean, this really does vary journal to journal and through subject matter. So it's hard to give you a one sort of figure on that.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, clear. Okay, we're moving on. Is there anything we should look at in the process of accepting an article to avoid submitting to predatory journals?
Absolutely. This is a really good question. So I would recommend that, okay, so for starters, there are some lists of predatory journals. They are not always, I guess, regularly updated, so you can't just go on that. I mean, lately we're seeing more and more predatory journals come up in the open access space, right? And so one of the great things is that the indexation for open access journals by the DOAJ, so the Directory of Open Access Journals, that happened very, very quickly. So you might know that indexation on, say, Scopus or Clarivate, that can take journals years to achieve. But for the Directory of Open Access Journals, which is a very, very reputable index, that happens after a journal publishes 5 articles. So it happens relatively quickly. So if you see a new journal that's open access, you can jump onto DOAJ and you can check if the journal is indexed there. And if they are, that is a very, very good indication that that is a reputable journal. Obviously, journals which are published by reputable publishing houses like Elsevier is another good indication that that is a reputable journal. But, you know, it does take sometimes some research on the part of the some research on the part of the researcher to do some background work on the journals.
Clear. Thanks. Okay, we're moving on. We have another question from Pao on Facebook. So can only the main author respond to review comments, or can secondary authors respond as well?
Right. Okay. So generally speaking, the correspondence is to the corresponding author, but it really just depends on journal to journal. But usually all of the other authors are CC'd. So you will see all of the comments, but generally it's the corresponding author that does do the correspondence. Having said that, though, it's not just the responsibility of the corresponding author to write the response. So you should be still working as part of your team. And obviously, you know, each author has a different responsibility when writing up the manuscript. There may be different parts of the experiments. It really just depends how the manuscript is broken up and how you divided the work. But it's everyone's work then to respond to the comments, and then that is fed back to the journal by one author.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's pretty, it doesn't really leave me any follow-up questions. I mean, you answer everything so precisely and clearly. I mean, that's very good. Okay, and moving on, there's another question here. Which is the right time to respond to the comments? I think you mentioned a bit before, but it might be good just to go over it again and leave it clear.
Yeah, sure. So you're given a time frame. Really, any time within that time frame is totally fine. You don't get extra points for getting them back the next day, so don't rush it. Do it within the time frame, and that's completely fine. Obviously, I mean, if you have the time to do them sooner rather than later, that's great. But don't try and rush it because you think it will appear better. Give it the time that it deserves and get them back within the time frame would be my advice.
Cool, calm, and collected. Right?
That's the way.
Okay, we have another question. They're coming through thick and fast, so clearly it's getting a lot of movement, which is good. This is great response. Do open access journals follow the same process and rules to publish?
That's a really good question. Okay, and yes, they do. So in short, yes, open access journals follow the exact same process of peer review that hybrid and subscription journals follow. There is absolutely no difference in the way that they are reviewed. We have reviewers that review and editors that work on our subscription, hybrid, open access journals, and there is no difference in the direction that we give them. Obviously, each journal has its own aims and scopes, its own sort of standards. It's looking for its own part of, the publication pie, basically. So as long as it fits within the aims and scopes, there's no difference to the way that the review takes place.
Cool. Okay, still more coming in. Okay, how do you handle a divided decision? Say, for instance, one reviewer says very good comments about your work, but then another reviewer doesn't say such good comments. What would you recommend to the author?
Right, and this is the beauty of peer review, in that you get a selection of comments and you basically have to please everybody. This is where I guess the editor first has a role to play, in that they are going to be the deciding factor between reviewers. But if you get comments and one reviewer likes the overall sort of vibe of your manuscript and another reviewer has some problems, you need to appreciate the first reviewer's comments while addressing the second reviewer. If there are conflicting comments about one specific point, one reviewer is asking you to do one thing and it directly competes with something else, then you should ask the editor for clarification. That rarely happens because it's the editor's job to make sure that the comments don't sort of tear you in two directions. So if it's a direct conflict between reviewers, ask the editor for clarification. Otherwise, just try to sort of address each one as it is.
I think that's a good comment, because it's complicated enough already, and then if you have conflicting feedback, then yeah, so maybe the editor can definitely help to provide more clarity there.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Great. Okay. Oh, we have another one. Okay, so let me see. This one's in Spanish. So how many rounds can I have before my manuscript is accepted, or does it depend on that? Or is that a factor? It would be.
Yeah, okay, so you can definitely go for more than one round of review. That's absolutely normal. Basically, if you're asked to revise your manuscript, especially if it's a major revision, it will go out for another round of review generally. If it's a minor revision, it may not go out for a second round of review, only because the editor may receive the review and if you've laid it out very clearly, the editor may just look at the revision and make a decision himself or herself. There may be no need to send it out again. But if it's a major revision, the editor may want to contact the same reviewers to have a look over it, or they may want to send it out to new reviewers for another round of review. This may happen 1, 2, 3 times. If you don't address the comments, this will increase the amount of revisions that you're asked to do. That's one point. If you sort of try to ignore some of the comments because you don't want to address them, it will get stuck in this cycle of asking you to keep looking at that point. But 1, 2, 3 rounds of revision is fairly normal.
But in this case, is there no limit? There's no set limit? There's no kind of...
There is no set limit, as in we don't have a stop process in this, only because generally if the publication is so far away from being accepted that it wouldn't be accepted in a couple of rounds of review, it would generally be rejected, basically. We don't try to make the publication something that is so far away from what it was submitted as. Obviously, editors do like to work with authors to try and improve the manuscript, but it needs to be at a particular level before we do that, because editors can't work with every author sort of to refine the manuscript extensively.
Yeah, of course. Okay, moving on again. Some people recommend to define first the journal and then write your article. Is this a good practice, or would you recommend the other way?
I would personally recommend the other way, only because the research is the research. How do you know what it's going to be before you've done it? And if you're sort of going backwards, I think it's dangerous. It could be dangerous. I do think it's a good idea to have an idea of the journals, within your research area, but to say before you've done an experiment that this paper is going to end up in that journal, what happens if you get unexpected results? I mean, it's yeah, I think that it's best to lead to sort of, have the research direct the journal that it's going towards.
Yeah. I can understand the question, but I can understand the answer as well. I mean, I think it makes sense the way you're putting it. Okay, will it be beneficial for my career if I am a reviewer or editor?
Absolutely. Okay, so that's a really good question. I mean, being a reviewer or an editor will get you onto, it's something that you can put on a CV. It's a really great way to get you in touch with the latest cutting edge research. It's beneficial for you because you can also get exposure to papers outside of your sort of direct research group. You can see how other people structure their experiments and how they write up their results. So I would definitely encourage you to get involved in the process, because it's only a learning experience for yourself. I know that I mentioned Researcher Academy earlier, but on Research Academy, there is a certified peer reviewer course. So if you're thinking about getting involved in peer review, you can take this course, you get a certificate when you complete it, and you can put that into your CV. So it's also a great thing to show.
Oh, and as if by magic, here is the link for Researcher Academy. I mean, it'd be good for everyone to definitely have a look inside, and it's quite easy to navigate. There's a lot of resources on there, and definitely if you have any questions, then feel free to reach out to anyone here at Elsevier. Okay, let me see. We have another question. So that was just a quick flash of we'll put that link up again in a while. But there's another one. What should I do if I think the reviewer comments are offensive? Oh no. Hello? I think maybe we're having some technical issues with Catherine, or maybe I'm frozen. Okay, yeah, so sorry, I'm being told it was actually Catherine who's frozen. In any case, I mean, I think that was the end of the questions, so I think we can round off the session. First of all, I would like to thank Catherine. It's a shame that she's not in the session anymore. Maybe she'll be able to join us before we finish. I'd like to extend our gratitude to Catherine for this very interesting and very informative session today. I think it's full of good tips and good points that people will be able to use and apply. And also I'd like to thank all of the participants. As I mentioned before, we have people from all over Mexico who've been joining and are being very participative, asking questions, making comments. So that's the kind of things that we like to see, and it's great to see people joining from YouTube and from Facebook and on the platform. So I think with nothing else for today, we will close the session, and we're going to put, oh, Catherine's back.
I'm back. Sorry, I got bumped out to enter again. Sorry about that.
It's okay. I was just finishing the session. I mean, we were pretty much, I think, finished the last few questions, unless anything else pops up in the screen now.
Sure.
But yeah, I was just expressing my gratitude towards you. That was a fantastic session, and I think there's a lot of tips and points and definitely a lot of insight that people will be able to use and apply going forward. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Dan.
And I was saying thanks to all the participants as well, who have been very participative with questions.
I know, absolutely. Thanks for all the questions. It's great.
And so I think there was a closeout video, and I think with that we can close the session. And once again, thanks to everyone.
Thank you. All the best.